A few months back, I decided to rewatch The Batman for the first time since its release back in 2022. And it got me thinking about the adaptations that have come before, and I slowly found myself beginning to question just what exactly made this movie in particular stand out from its predecessors. What single factor, or factors for that matter, ended up striking such a steep contrast in comparison? This single question sparked a several month-long journey into the live-action depictions of the Caped Crusader, and my god, I feel like I have a lot to say. And so, without further ado, in this video I'm going to be going through my personal thoughts and opinions on Matt Reeves' Batman, and go through just why I believe it hits so different. So then, let's get started, shall we? To start with, there have been many different depictions of the Batman over the years, but for this video I'll be mainly focusing on the theatrical performances starting from the 1989 Batman movie starring Michael Keaton. I decided to choose this route as I'll be focusing more on the darker, more in-depth depictions of the character as opposed to the more comical appearances we've had in the past. I'm sorry Adam West, I still love you. This means we've got a pretty great selection of movies to compare with the Batman, so without further ado, let's kick things off with the first major factor we should consider. Firstly, I must say that direction-wise these movies are all very well directed. I mean, we previously had directors like Tim Burton, Christopher Nolan and Zack Snyder all get involved with a Batman film here and there, and I've got to say Matt Reeves has done an incredible job adding to the roster with this movie. Out of all of the films I watched for this video, I must say Reeves and the production crew did a phenomenal job capturing the true essence of Gotham, and in similar fashion to Tim Burton, managed to create a perfect setting for the Batman to exist in. Specifically, I'd love to call attention to the more gothic depiction of Gotham used in this movie. I think that the gothic style of architecture lends really well to Batman, as I feel the two go hand in hand. As a result, I always appreciate its use when tackling an adaptation of The Dark Knight. And speaking of dark, this movie is really dark. Like literally. It's pretty clear at this point that darkness is one of Batman's signature tools in crime fighting, and Matt Reeves makes great use of the concept with most scenes taking place at night. I feel this factor is imperative to Batman's style of fighting. For me, I can't help but feel like something's off when I see Batman fighting during broad daylight. It just feels like such a direct misunderstanding of one of his most important tools, so I was happy that they really chose to emphasise the use of darkness in this movie. Take the intro sequence for example, with the darkness itself acting upon his behalf, scaring criminals alone out of the fear of his potential presence. This for me I believed was imperative in discerning the difference between this movie and the rest. Where The Dark Knight is more realistic and grounded, it loses me on the true essence of Gotham, with its take on the city ultimately changing drastically throughout the trilogy. And don't get me started on whatever the fuck this is. Gotham to me has always been a dark city shrouded in tall towers and thick layers of mystery, and by just looking at the concept art for this movie, I think they got the memo. But aside from the visuals, there's also another huge factor we need to consider.
Sometimes in the morning, I have to force myself to remember everything that happened.
Alright, Batman movies struggle with plot. Look, I'm just gonna say it. Since rewatching all of these movies, I was shocked to discover just how random some of these movies tended to be. Growing up, I considered these movies to be the shit, but rewatching them I was astounded as to some of the writing at play here. But don't get me wrong, they're still plenty of fun to watch and still genuinely brilliant. Take The Dark Knight for example. Each character was truly fascinating to watch and each twist and turn absolutely held up all these years later. But how does the Batman contend in comparison? Well, I got to say, I loved the writing of this movie. From the high-stakes mysteries of the Riddler to the brutal nature of the Batman, this movie was top-notch. I'd specifically like to call out the emphasis on the detective side of DC being heavily utilised here. I feel it's the first Batman movie to properly showcase the true detective side of the character that often goes overlooked in these adaptations, often in favour of high-budget action sequences and explosions galore. But don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of those. For those who need a refresher, this movie follows a young Bruce Wayne well into his second year of being the Batman. At this point, the Batman is already well established, with Reeves taking the approach to not redo the same alley scene for the 100th time, and instead opt to focus on Batman's adjustment into society and showcase how the common people of Gotham view this vigilante. The movie explores Bruce's deepest fears as he attempts to push himself further than he ever has before to take down a new serial killer in Gotham City, a kick streamer who threatens to shake up Bruce's own perception of the Gotham justice system, as well as his beloved parents' legacy. Along the way, Bruce works with pre-established allies like Gordon and Alfred, as well as finding a new acquaintance with another costume clown on the streets, Catwoman, aka Selina Kyle. This movie dives deep into the corruption of Gotham City and really goes the extra mile to show us a glimpse into the crime families of Gotham, with characters like Carmine Falcone, who is clearly a point of interest for Reeves, opting to even create the Penguin spin-off TV show to further expand the lore into this dark underbelly of Gotham. But I'm getting sidetracked. When thinking about the plot, there are a few scenes in particular I always call upon. The introduction sequence does a phenomenal job introducing us to this Batman and his brutal nature, as well as getting us a peek into the Batman's thoughts as we hear narration based upon his diligent note-taking throughout the night. The next scene in particular being the church scene, in which we get to see a glimpse of this movie's take on Bruce Wayne and his paranoia, continuing to suspect and gather information to help in his pursuits of the Riddler in a completely different setting than both the audience and him are used to. We also get a glimpse of his heroic side begin to come through, something that leads perfectly into what I consider to be my favourite scene, the rescue scene. The rescue scene in particular being in reference to one of the final scenes of the movie, in which Batman drops the vengeance persona and instead chooses to help give hope to the people of Gotham, saving them in the most desperate time of need. It really solidified a full circle moment for the character, turning away from a vengeance-fueled monster to a symbol of hope, and I can't wait to see this change take full effect in the next movie. But next up, I think it's time we talk about the next major factor. Okay, to start with, this portion of the video will be split into 4 parts, with each part going through the major character and how I feel they compare to previous depictions in the past. So without further ado, Zoe Kravitz, all things considered, was a pretty great Catwoman. I really liked her side plot with her involvement with Falcone and their strange relationship. And although we didn't get to see too much of Catwoman action in this movie, I feel they did a great job showing us her unique fighting style without doing too much.
Meow.
Her and Batman have some great chemistry, and I love to see that relationship develop throughout the movie. However, I feel like nothing new was really touched on here, and can be said for the plethora of other Catwomans we've seen in the past. Design-wise, I wasn't the biggest fan of her costume. I can understand the want for a more grounded take for the mask, but it just left much to be desired, and I would have much preferred a different approach with the mask, perhaps something more akin to the Arkham games. I really like Gordon in this movie. I really enjoyed getting to see the more buddy cop style relationship him and Batman have, and the deep trust they hold between them, forming more of a personal partnership instead of acting just on behalf of the GCPD. They had some great scenes together, not to mention a few funny moments as well, and I can't wait to see where their partnership leads going into the next movie. If I'm being honest, live action wise, many of the previous adaptations of Gordon have been severely underutilised, and the relationship between Batman and Gordon is often only sometimes briefly mentioned, or just not mentioned at all. And again, I've got to say Nolan's Gordon was one of the only real contenders. A close runner-up would be J.K. Simmons, but I think that's just a bit of personal bias, to be honest. Now this was a tricky one. We've had plenty of Alfreds over the years, and many have done a phenomenal job playing the character. I was really interested in this depiction of Alfred. Andy Serkis was a great choice to show off not only the father side of the character, but also the mental side, where in the context of this movie, Alfred is the individual responsible for training Bruce in self-defense. I really enjoyed that personal involvement much more than Batman's traditional training under the League of Shadows, and in the context of this universe makes much more sense. Much like Bale and Kane, I feel that Pattinson and Serkis worked really well together, capturing a more raw state of their relationship. I really love the development of the relationship between the two, as Bruce is forced to learn just how much Alfred truly means to him when it matters most. And much like Gordon, I'm excited to see what they do with Alfred moving forward. Finally, however, it's time to go through arguably the most anticipated character, the villain, aka Paul Dano did a great job of portraying this new take on the Riddler. I love the more jigsaw style approach to both the character and his design, as well as the influencer route they ended up going with. Although a bit drastic, it does a good job showing off a near dystopian future with social media and how it can be used by a villain to further their agenda. Overall, the Riddler was a perfect choice for the villain of this movie, with the abundance of riddles and mysteries that unfold in a really satisfying way and do a good job at building up the threat the character posed. As villain portrayals goes, of course it doesn't hold a candle to villain portrayals in previous movies, but I can understand how it can be an unfair comparison. So in the case of comparing this Riddler to past performances of the character,
Sucking up your IQ, vacuuming the cortex, feeding off your brain.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and personally say I prefer this newer take on the character as opposed to what this is, but to each their own. But about now, you're probably wondering why I haven't talked about the literal title character of the movie. And well, I'm getting to that, but to do so I thought it would only be fitting to dedicate an entire chapter to this to do it right.
The hell are you supposed to be?
I'm vengeance.
Let's get one thing straight. If you were to tell me this motherfucker right here would be Batman, I would have laughed at you. I mean, I guess apart from both liking bats, I would have never have seen this casting coming, but I'm glad to eat my words. Pattinson turned out to be a phenomenal Batman, and I feel that considering the sheer amount of actors who played the character before, Pattinson really had quite the legacy to live up to. Pattinson's Batman is a vastly different take on the character we've seen before, with this Batman not truly becoming the Batman we know until the end of the movie, with most of the film being Batman's development from an immature brawler to the Dark Knight we all know and love. I also would like to take the time to talk about the design of the character, something that has always been a major topic of discussion when an adaptation is in production. I mean, here's a look at some of the suits we've got in the past, all pulling from different references and in some cases being wholly original. In Tim Burton's case, revolutionising the concept of body armour being incorporated into the suit, instead of the standard spandex commonly associated with the heroes, as well as using a single colour approach to most of the armour. Something repeated with most adaptations, with Ben Affleck's suit as an exception, pulling from Frank Miller's Dark Knight comic era as well as adopting the blue design later in the franchise, whereas Bale's suit from the Dark Knight movies are more like high-tech combat armour, pulling from real-life military armour and tactical gear. And then, Kilmer and Clooney have nipples. Nice. And now Pattinson's suit. A general mix of all of the above. The handmade stitching on the cowl, the military riot gear / body armour, the reintroduction of the dark grey that blends really well with the black elements of the costume. Everything about this suit is awesome, and the design team did a great job putting the whole thing together. It's a perfect blend of the more realistic vision for the character, as well as paying homage to the classic comic design. All that's left now is the pointed cape to really nail the bat-like silhouette. Overall, this Batman has quickly scaled up there for me in terms of the rankings, and I'm curious to see just what James Gunn does with his version of the Batman joining the DCU in the near future. But there you have it, a deep dive into Matt Reeves' Batman, and how I feel it feels different in comparison to its predecessors. But before I wrap up this video, I think it's imperative to make one thing clear before signing off. Batman is a character enjoyed by many, and is enjoyed for a multitude of different reasons. Over the years, we've seen so many different iterations of the character, and ultimately what I may view as Batman may be completely different to someone else's. What I may have disliked in other movies could be something someone loves, and I just feel that it's important to recognise this fact. And as long as topics like these can remain a healthy discussion in the DC fandom, things would be way better for it. But with all that said in mind, I really do hope you enjoyed this video. I know we didn't dive too far into the other movies, but perhaps that's a video for another day. Thank you so much for watching both this video and all my others. It means the world to me that people enjoy the content, and I'll continue to work hard to improve my skills and make something really worth watching. As always, see you around.